a lot of the folks listening right now, like, they don't work for an Uber, they don't work for a company that has this global presence. I myself has never worked for an Uber. Like my closest comparative would be like my short stint at WordPress.com, and it was really the only time where I never had to worry about sample sizes for experimentation. It's the first time I had a data science team to support us on like experimentation design. I don't remember the exact numbers, but like we had crazy traffic and crazy signups. And most of that was like people being confused between WordPress and WordPress.com. That's another story. But I'm sure like you had crazy volumes of data at Uber as well, obviously. But that's not the case, like I said, for 90% of the companies and most of the folks listening right now. So this idea of incrementality and running experiments, it's the gold standard. It's the best way to prove what is driving revenue and what isn't. But it's a bit of a privilege too, right? Like not everyone has the capacity or the ability to do that. What should you do when you're dealing with tiny sample sizes? Like a lot of our listeners are B2B. Like, do you still need to measure ROI for everything that you're kind of do? Like, what's your advice for like earlier stage founders that don't have that volume?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I know the gold standard is a true A/B test, but to me, incrementality is more the mindset of, hey, we just want to validate and justify, right? Like, just a lot of these companies will also at one point will have MMMs, and like you can't just trust what MMM says. You also have to validate it with some sort of test design. So what I would say is there's two things. Like a lot of data scientists will shit on pre-post. Pre-post does have a really good use case, not only in data science, but in life. I mean, an examples, thousands of years ago, you would come up on something and you would be like, all right, well, let me try this. How do I feel before and after? Right?
Hmm.
You can isolate things to pre-post if you isolate it to a very specific one thing and make sure that the variable that's changing is just one thing, right? It's a different versus if I were at Uber and I had turned off Facebook without an A/B test and then said, okay, well, all of the drop is 100% correlated to this spend drop. Well, I could say that, but my confidence level is going to be super low, right? Because we had crazy seasonality. Uber is a very seasonal business. Right. And sometimes in months, our CEO would say something and our stock would just plummet or go up. Right. Like there's a lot of brand things. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of regulation. Like the problem was that you couldn't isolate it. Now, if you're a company and you're saying, listen, I'm going to keep everything else flat. I'm not going to, I don't have a huge product release that could change my numbers. You can do pre-post. Right. And actually, I had someone on my podcast who is at a huge marketplace, is at Faire, and he gave an example where they were doing a branded search test in France with pre-post, but they isolated it to a specific keyword in branded search in a specific region. Isolating, I mean, you're essentially going to be able to know that that is the true cause, right? Especially if you see a large drop. It's not because there's all these confluence of factors all at once. It's because of that one thing. So isolate one thing. And the second thing is, if you are a early stage company with small sample sizes, in my mind, you should be aiming for home runs. And home runs can be picked up with small sample sizes, right? If you've got an MDE of 30, 40%, those are rare, but at that stage, that's kind of what you're trying to hit for. You're not trying to do these micro optimizations. And so it's a bit of a strategic lever too, to aim for things that you can measure with small sample sizes, because that is the sort of, whether it's a new ICP, new copy on the website, and copy, I mean like a fundamental rechanging of your value props, not just like a little tweak. These things do show up with small sample sizes. So it's a bit more about having the discipline to control everything, go into the test saying, okay, we're just isolating these factors. We're just making this one change. Here's how we've addressed and thought about how it could be impacted by other things, but we're fairly confident, right? At the end of the day, A/B test is just about confidence. Pre-post is a less confident, A/B test is more confident. So you just have to essentially gauge that confidence to risk level.
Yeah, I love the point about the big bets. Like when you're smaller, like you are less obsessed about changing the color on this button on your homepage or changing the H1. Like redo the whole landing page, redo the whole homepage, like launch a new part of your product, or completely remove in the 50-50 test, like book a free trial versus like see an ungated, like pre-recorded version of your demo. Like those are the bigger tests that should have higher minimal detectable effects, where you need less like large volumes to say with 95% confidence that like, yeah, this version was better. Like in this case, you're shooting for much better differences, and that detection doesn't have to, require that large sample size. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, perfect. And I can just give another example at that travel tech startup that you mentioned that I was at. We must have had only like 1 or 200 signups a week. And we ran an A/B test where we changed like a big part of our onboarding flow and saw a 40% drop. And like it is
Mhm.
very obvious what happened, right? But I pushed for that A/B test because I didn't want to then have to deal with the CEO after discussing what happened. Like it's just easier, even if it's like a poorly powered A/B test, you can still then take, again, it's about risk. And I was like, I'm willing to take the risk with 100 people because I'll see if something massive drops. If it doesn't,
Mhm.
and right, like if it's saying, hey, like, with 60% confidence this thing worked or not, you're gonna roll it out anyway. So go ahead and roll it out. But at least now I caught the back end, which is it was a 30-40% drop with like 95% confidence. That's the stuff I'm trying to protect against, less so, trying to be super like rigorous about A/B testing.